So thank you for taking the time to come to this workshop. This is honestly one of the most sort of exciting technologies that I've ever seen, and it's always fun to go and share, what I'm seeing with this technology and different ways of using it. So if you don't know me, I'm Jules White. I'm a professor in computer science, and I'm also the director of the Vanderbilt Initiative on the Future of Learning and Generative AI. So really trying to figure out how we take this technology and we basically teach all of the best practices in terms of use and innovation with it across the Vanderbilt campus and build a community around this technology. I'm going to go ahead and just put a couple resources on screen while I'm getting started here, just so that if you have to drop early or those types of things, then you'll have access to these resources and already seen them. But, at a high level, in November, or December, whenever I started looking at it, let's see. Okay. Somebody's having trouble. Can other people hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I just got a chat message. So this technology is sort of one of the most extraordinary things that I've seen, I think, in probably my career and probably will see in my career. And, we certainly were aware of these, this whole concept of transformers and large language models and kind of the interesting things they could do. But suddenly when they went and scaled them up, all of these sort of unexpected, just sort of unbelievable computational capabilities and other capabilities came out of them that, really began to excite me and some of my collaborators, like Jesse Spencer-Smith and Doug Schmidt. But the challenge is when I started looking at the media and the news and what was being reported, you don't really see much other than they're going to be used to help people cheat on exams or write essays, or it's Terminator and it's going to take over the world. And there's not a lot of the in-between. And the in-between is where the really exciting, transformational, real stuff is happening. And so what I want to do in this presentation today is really sort of showcase some of the capabilities of these tools. And as I go along, please feel free to stop me at any time. I'm also going to try to wrap up with 45 minutes or 30 minutes, something around that amount of time, to take questions at the end and discuss anything that would be helpful. Also, if if anything in this presentation or that would be helpful to you, I'll follow up with these links at the end, but also feel free to email me at jules.white@vanderbilt.edu, which is listed up here. So just to get started, I want to just talk a little bit about prompts and so what prompts are. So what ChatGPT and other large language models are, and I'm just going to talk about ChatGPT in general in this presentation just for simplicity, but I'm incorporating GPT-4, all the different versions in this. But ChatGPT, when you go and interact with it, you interact with it kind of like a chatbot. You send it some text or a statement like write a poem about the French Revolution, and it responds by outputting some text. Now, it wasn't designed to be a source of truth, a source of fact. It wasn't designed to do computation. It was just designed basically to generate text in response to you giving it text. And those statements that you give it are called prompts. So, create a Pokemon game for my child, that would be a prompt, and then it would go and respond to that prompt. And none of these are particularly great prompts, by the way. They're all just examples of prompts. So one of the things that I see when I see examples out discussed in the media in particular is that people have this perception that it needs to get everything right on the first try. So they go and they say, I asked ChatGPT this question, it gave me this response, the response is flawed, therefore this is a terrible tool. It's error prone, it hallucinates, it isn't worthwhile. And the key thing that's missing here is this is a tool that really the power of it comes out when you start having conversations and you iteratively refine content. So when you get creative and you start engaging in a conversation with the tool and going and trying to build something and refine it over a series of interactions, that's when the real power of the tool comes out. So what you want to do when you're working with it is, I always explain this kind of like, you can imagine if somebody went and handed Michelangelo a new hammer, and Michelangelo went up to a piece of stone and he hit the stone once, and he looked at it and he said, oh, it doesn't look like the Pietà. It's not a beautiful sculpture. And he threw the hammer down on the ground and said, I'll never use this tool again. And that's what people are doing a lot of times when you look at how they're interacting with ChatGPT. No, the truth is that Michelangelo goes and he hits the sculpture over and over, and he uses it to refine the stone until he gets some beautiful sculpture out of it. And he also refines his skill with the tool in order to become a better user of it. And that's one of the key things that's missing in a lot of what we see, discussed in the media, and a lot of the examples we see is that they're not taking the tool and really using it in an effective way. So I'm going to give you an example of this. And I always try to start off a lot of my talks with an example that's accessible to anybody, and we all have to eat. And I also try to think of what is a task that would be really hard to find somebody in Nashville to do, and to do it as well and as fast as ChatGPT can do it. And so this is a task that I commonly talk about. I say, you know what, ChatGPT, please create a meal plan for my family that is based on a fusion of food from Ethiopia and Uzbekistan. I want to eat keto and up to 2,000 calories per day. Pick dishes where the ingredients are easy to get from an average US grocery store. And what does ChatGPT say? Sure. And it says breakfast, scrambled eggs with sauteed onions, tomatoes, and Ethiopian berber spice mix. And then notice what it does. In parentheses, it says made with chili powder, paprika, garlic powder, ginger, cumin, and coriander, because I told it I want dishes that I can get the ingredients from an average US grocery store. And it's signaling to me, hey, berber spice mix is something that you can get at the average US grocery store. And then it has, lunch, Uzbek style lamb kebabs. I don't think that there's a human in Nashville that can do that task as fast as ChatGPT did it. And I think it did a pretty good job on the first pass. And it also, you look at the complexity of the computation that went into producing that answer. It had to go and combine a lot of different ideas together and understand the concept of average US grocery store and ingredients in order to do this. Now, I could go and I could nitpick this and I could say, it generated a meal plan for me, but look, I said 2,000 calories per day, and this thing doesn't have serving size. So this thing is a terrible nutritionist. It's a terrible meal planner. I'm just going to throw it away. Look how bad ChatGPT is. But then we would be missing the point, right? Because all you have to do is follow up to ChatGPT and help it refine what it's done. So I just say, hey, can you give me an approximate serving size for myself for each dish that is within my 2,000 calorie limit? And so then we get back, sure, and it goes and adds serving sizes. So we have now two eggs, half a cup of onions, half a cup of tomatoes, 1 teaspoon of berber spice mix, quarter medium avocado. So now we're getting serving sizes. Now, I don't know if this actually fits in my 2,000 calories. I haven't fact checked it. Or I could say, well, I'm keto, right? And it's listing half a cup of onions. I'm not sure if the macros for that work out, but I could keep going and refining this and iterating on it and improving it. And, if I could take this meal plan, I could work on it as long as I want. And I think you would have a hard time finding a human being that could iterate as quickly as ChatGPT or another tool like this can, and help you yield a really, interesting product and high quality product. You just have to keep going. But I thought, well, let's get more interesting and showcase the capabilities of what the tool can do. So I thought, well, what's my real challenge to this meal plan? And it's not serving sizes. It's that I have a 9-year-old, and my 9-year-old is a pretty adventurous eater, but, getting him to try a new dish is the real battle. So I thought, well, maybe I can get ChatGPT to help me solve this problem. So I say, my son is 9. Sometimes he won't try new dishes. To make this culinary adventure more fun for him, can you create a short Pokemon battle story to go with each dish? I will read the stories with him before dinner to get him excited about trying the new food. Make sure the story ends with a cliffhanger that will motivate him to try the food. Okay. And so what does ChatGPT say? Sure. And it says, story, Pikachu and his friends were exploring the wilds of Ethiopia when they were suddenly ambushed by a group of sneaky Pokemon thieves. And then it goes on to say, in the end, they emerged victorious, but not before the dragon left a fiery spice that imbued their breakfast eggs with a flavorful kick. Can you help Pikachu and his friends defeat the berber dragon and enjoy this spicy breakfast? So it understood the concept of what I was trying to achieve. And I say understood, I'm going to use these terms like this, whatever you want to call it. And it then has produced content to go with it that even has this concept of a cliffhanger. Okay, and Ray, you had a question?
Yeah, my question is if you go back to the prompt, sorry for that picture. If you go back to the prompt, do you have, like, how short could it be, and shorter than what you have, and still produce that kind of response? Like, how much of what you put in what we see now would be necessary to generate that response?
That's a great question. I don't know. We could kind of like do a study where we played around with pulling things out. My sense is that you would need the cliffhanger. You would need, I think, certain things. I think, for example, if we didn't say to go with each dish, then we wouldn't see this behavior where it's showing us the breakfast above it. So like I think there's a lot of things that are happening here. So if we started pulling things out, like, for example, if we pulled out to go with each dish, we'd probably lose it saying, here's breakfast, and then here's the story to go with breakfast. And we'd probably get just the story. This is my intuition of what would happen. I don't know if it's correct or not. And then if we pulled out like if we pulled out the cliffhanger, I don't think we're going to get the end where it says, can you help Pikachu and his friends? And I think that also comes from, motivating him to try food. So I think you could probably pretty easy just put in like Pokemon battle story or something, and probably get it to do something that has Pokemon battle stories in Ethiopia, maybe, or some of the what came before. But I think you would lose the structure in terms of like, here's the recipe, here's the story to go with it, here's the cliffhanger. So I think you would lose some of that. But I don't know. I'd have to play around with it to try it, but that's a great question. So then I thought about, like, what else do we do at the dinner table with my son? And I thought, well, we talked to him about what he's learning in school. And one of the things he loves is he loves math, and he loves playing math games on the iPad. And I thought, is there a way that I can turn this into a math game to go with the story that would make him more excited about doing this whole sort of culinary thing? And so I said, I would like you to play a math game with my 9-year-old to teach him about division with fractions and nutrition. Ask him questions one at a time involving Pokemon and these topics, and make it into a game. When he wins, the Pokemon win. Ask the first question. And this is starting to use some prompt engineering to make this work well. And so what does ChatGPT do? It says, okay, question 1, Pikachu and his friends are planning a meal that includes half a cup of cooked rice, but they need to divide it evenly among 3 Pokemon. How much rice will each Pokemon get? Gives him a hint. And then what does it do? It waits for him to put in the answer. So it's flipped the script, and it's now starting to ask him questions and waiting for his response, as opposed to waiting for him to ask questions to it. So now he puts in 1/6, and then it says, good job. And then it works out the math for him and showing him that that's the correct answer, and here's why. And then goes on to asking the next question to him and waiting for his response. So really quickly, with just a couple paragraphs of text, we've gone from generating a meal plan, which I don't think you can look up the Ethiopian keto, or Uzbekistan Ethiopian keto average US grocery store meal plan, and then turning it into adding serving sizes, battle stories, and math game. Yeah, Ray, you had a question?
Yeah, so in the series of interactions, is it each one de novo, or is it retaining the stream of context prior to the immediate question?
Great question. So everything is retaining. So this is one continuous conversation. So basically, the prompt is, every time I send a message, the prompt, assuming there could be other things under the hood of ChatGPT we can't see fully, but basically it's appending to what came before and then sending everything off to it again, is roughly the way to think about it. Or at least that's the belief as to what's happening.
Great, thanks.
And so then the last step is, I thought, well, it's great to have this interaction between ChatGPT, quizzing my son on Pokemon and math. But as a computer scientist, I'd love to be able to run this outside of ChatGPT. So then I just say, let's create code for this in Python, and I give it some constraints on the languages and how I want it to program this thing. And then it goes off and generates the Python application to run this whole thing. And then here it is running as a web application on an iPad. So like really quickly, we take this idea and we begin refining it through a series of paragraphs and interactions. And then we get all of this sort of rich outputs. They could be the starting point to go and do things. We could take it and refine it further. We could take the code and make it more sophisticated. We could take the meal plan and continue to iterate on it. All of these things. But the key to it is you've got to engage in this conversation where you're continuously sort of refining and iterating on the content, as opposed to thinking of, a one-off interaction with it. So what I was just showing you was just pure ChatGPT, and we've gone a long way with just chatting back and forth and just doing text. And just a week or two ago, they've been releasing tools for a while, but really one of the most sort of impressive ones just came out about a week or two ago. It's called ChatGPT Code Interpreter. And when these tools, this intelligence starts being baked into all of our, all of the things like Office 365 and Microsoft Word and all of that other stuff, that's when we're really going to see these transformational capabilities. So when people ask me like, is this stuff overhyped? I always say it's underhyped, because we've been working off of a chat interface for all this time. And imagine what's going to happen when it's natively integrated into all these tools that we use on a daily basis. So just to give you a quick taste of what this looks like, continuing on the meal plan theme, I went into Code Interpreter where you can actually upload documents to it. And Code Interpreter can go and read and work with documents. It can also write code autonomously on its own in order to help accomplish tasks that you ask it to do. And so it's basically building software in the background. So I uploaded a keto meal plan as a Word file. I uploaded a PDF file that had a whole bunch of different workouts in it. And I basically told it, here's my meal plan, and I'm going to do the HIIT workout, high intensity interval training workout that's in this list of workouts and what they are. And then I said, okay, I want you to combine all of this. And I've sort of excerpted from the conversation. I said, combine all this with the expected number of calories that a 5'9", 200-pound, 30 sedentary man would burn, and generate a visualization. I say update because I did this in a series of iterations through the conversation. I'm just going to show you kind of the end. And it goes through and works out the BMR for this thing. And then it writes code in the background and generates the visualization here. So basically, I upload all the documents. I basically walk through iterating on it, telling it what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to accomplish, and then it produces the visualization for me. Similarly, I thought, well, what's the most fun document that I ever deal with? Is the most obvious, straightforward that I could possibly come up with. And of course, it's the IRS 1040 for my taxes. So I uploaded the 1040 and I said, extract this into plain text and tell me about what all the information is that I'm going to need. And it can go and do that. But when it gets really interesting is when you start asking it questions like, which boxes, if checked, would require filling out additional forms? And it can go and interpret the underlying 1040 and then tell me which additional forms I might have to fill out if I check particular boxes. You can also go do this. A fun example is to go, you take the Vanderbilt travel policy and start asking it questions about travel policy. And it'll give you, if you do it right and you have the right prompt engineering, you can get it to give you answers to crazy questions like, if my car breaks down, I'm on the side of the road and I pay somebody to take me on a motorcycle, is this going to get approved? And it'll give you answers like, well, your financial unit manager is probably going to have to, approve that. And it has to be the most appropriate, form of, transportation. But it can do this and go and read things. But it can also go and do all kinds of other phenomenal and fascinating tasks. Like you can upload a set of files that you have. So I took, in this example, I just uploaded a bunch of PDFs that were sitting in my downloads folder. And I basically told it, read all the PDFs, propose a folder structure to organize the files, propose better naming. And then when you have it all done, basically show it to me. And so it started showing me the folder structure. This is a printout of when it's showing me the folder structure of all the different PDFs and how it's going to categorize them. And it's dead on accurate in terms of what these PDFs were. It's got some of my travel receipts, some random things that extracted from different PDFs, some reports. And then I just basically, at the end of this conversation, I just say, okay, now create a zip file for me that organizes everything so that I can download it and I've got it. And so Code Interpreter can go and do all of that type of stuff. So, everything I'm going to be showing today, a lot of it's going to be just based on the engineering and sort of the reasoning and how do you interact with it. But it's when you intersect all this stuff with tools that it gets really transformational. So my firm belief is that all of our students are really going to need to know this stuff to be competitive in their domains, over the next 5 years. And our alumni are going to need to know it. We're going to need to know it in order to be efficient and effective with all these different tools, particularly the ones that are based on this sort of natural language interaction where we really want to make sure we're effective with them. Yeah, I think from a job market perspective, students are also going to want to know about this. There's all these, I don't know if how long this will last, but there's all these, prompt engineer postings for like 300,000, and they say, hey, you don't have to have a background in tech. We'll see if that holds up, but I certainly think this is going to be an important skill going forward. So what should we learn and what should we be teaching? And everybody just says, right, it's just text, so you don't need to do anything special, right? You just go ask it whatever you want and it'll work. And the answer is no, that's wrong. You really have to pay attention to the language and how you structure the input or the prompt that you give it to it, how you phrase everything has a big impact on the output, or it can. It doesn't always, but it can. And so you want to be really careful and mindful of how you design the language. Now, as a little bit of intuition on why the wording matters and the straight way you structure it matters, is basically the way that these models were trained, like ChatGPT, is they over and over had them try to predict the next word in a sentence. And this is a gross simplification, but it's kind of helpful for an intuition on how they work. So they would say, Mary had a little, and they would try to get it to predict lamb. And then they would say, Mary had a little lamb, and they would try to get it to predict its. And then Mary had a little lamb, its, and they would try to get it to predict fleece. And they did this over and over until it got good at predicting the next word in a sentence. And through that, it's basically learning patterns in human language. So it's getting good at identifying what are the patterns in the language that came before and what should it pay attention to in order to predict what the next word should be. So when you go in and you put in a prompt, it's looking at the patterns and the structure and the words and trying to figure out what the next word should be. And then after it predicts the first next word, it keeps going and basically predicting next words over and over and outputting what it's going to give you, the text that it's basically writing. So it's basically trying to predict next word. It just turns out that when you scale this up, to the scale of like ChatGPT, you get all of these sort of fascinating capabilities coming out of it. So just as a quick example of this, if you go put Mary had a little into ChatGPT, you'll get some variation on this. It'll either just say Mary had a little lamb, or it'll say Mary had a little lamb, its fleece is white as snow, or it'll give you like the rest of the nursery rhyme. But if you go in and you put Mary had a microscopic, typically it's just like, I don't know what to do with that because that's not a pattern that it's seen. And so it just looks like some, incomprehensible statement that it doesn't know how to react to, because there's not a pattern. It doesn't fit the mold of something that has a clear sort of next step. And so kind of intuitively, when you're writing prompts and you're building prompts, if they don't have the correct structure to them, it's not going to respond either in the way you want or repeatably or as effectively as it could, as if you had thought through the wording and gotten it right. So what we've been doing a lot of work on and research with Doug Schmidt and Jesse Spencer-Smith and other folks is looking at the patterns in the language that you need to use to solve different problems. Or another way of thinking about it is to tap into these sort of computational capabilities, because it's almost like a completely new computational paradigm where it has an instruction set that's sort of being figured out right now by the research community. And the best way to, interact with it, the best organization of the instructions is still sort of being figured out. And as we're going, one of the important things is to document sort of the patterns that you need to use in your language in order to interact with it effectively. So we call these prompt patterns. This is a paper that we did on it that's out on archive. Also, you can find it on Google Scholar. If you search for prompt engineering on Google Scholar, I think it's currently the #1 result. So I'm going to give you a simple example. This is a really powerful pattern. You see it all over the internet, and it's an incredibly useful one and also fascinating one. And the way to think about this is it's called the persona pattern. And basically in the real world, if you had some output you needed or some problem you needed solved or some advice you needed, you would go to a particular person or organization or role. So you might go to your accountant to get tax advice, or you might go to your doctor to get medical advice, or you might go to the IRS to get information about the status of your return. So you have some entity or persona that you would go and ask. And what it turns out is if you go and just tell ChatGPT to act as some persona, and whenever it produces output, produce the outputs that that persona would produce, it also starts doing things that look like the tasks or computation that that persona would do. So I'm going to give you an example of this. When I was first coming up with this, I needed a persona that I didn't know a lot about, but that I could fact check. And so I thought an interesting one is my wife is a speech pathologist for the school system, and she tests kids before they enter kindergarten. So she's typically testing 3-year-olds, and she helps determine if they need IEPs, basically, educational supports in place when they go to kindergarten. So I say, act as a speech language pathologist. I'm going to tell you what a 3-year-old said, and you'll write an assessment for me. The child said, I need way woy. So I tried to think about when my 9-year-old was 3, what he sounded like when he was mispronouncing things, and tried to capture that in language. And so here's what ChatGPT says. Based on the provided speech sample, it appears that the child may be experiencing some phonological and articulation errors, which are common in children around this age. The children's utterance appears to have errors in consonant production and possibly some difficulty with syllable structure. Consonant errors. It seems that the child has difficulty with the production of the consonant sounds, specifically N and L. The child said mead instead of need and woy instead of toy, assuming the intended words were need and toy. And then it goes on and it says syllable structure, production of the word way may indicate some difficulty with the correct syllable structure. It is possible the child intended to say play, but produced way instead, which suggests a substitution of the initial consonant cluster PL with a single consonant W. This could be an example of a simplification process called cluster reduction. So I also, of course, took this to my wife when she was getting ready to go to work that morning and showed it to her. And I'm like, is this correct? And she's like, yes, and kind of like irritated, because the least popular thing you can do is like show somebody ChatGPT doing something that looks like it's doing their job. I'm a software engineer, so I'm over this by now. Like, and she's like, yes, but it's not going to interact with kids. And I'm like, I agree, but imagine how this could accelerate you writing reports if it knows how to correctly structure everything and do everything. So this was based on that limited speech sample. It's like fairly accurate. And all of it, I just want to kind of point out one key thing is, notice how little I put in here. I didn't say, give me phonological assessment. I didn't say, give me articulation. I didn't say consonant cluster reduction. I didn't say syllable structure. I didn't say any of these things. I said, act as a speech language pathologist. And then it turned on, it tapped into this capability to generate output that looks like a speech language pathologist, and also take I need way woy and essentially do a diagnosis of it. Obviously, a diagnosis that needs a speech language pathologist to verify that that's reasonably accurate, but it's doing essentially computations in some respect that look like a speech pathologist. Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
So could you give it a persona like act like an aggressive negotiator, or act like a cooperative negotiator, or act like someone who's neurotic?
100%. Or act as an 80-year-old female with diabetes, undergraduate education in this, and give a complex background, and it can start trying to do it. Now, will it always do all personas accurately? Maybe not, but it's pretty darn good at like the personas you do. You can also give it like inanimate objects. So I can say, act as a computer that's been the victim of a cyber attack. I'm going to type in Linux bash commands, and you're going to output the corresponding output that would go to the Linux terminal if I type this command in. Tell me the story of why I'm investigating this computer. And then it puts out, it waits for you to type in a command, and I can go and type in like a complex Linux bash command. And if you're not familiar with this, don't worry about it. It's basically like these scripting commands for interacting with the computer, and it will completely correctly output like what the output would look like for that computer. You can also be like, pretend to be my dog and react how you would expect the dog to react based on what I'm doing. You know, you can do all kinds of crazy personas, and it like quickly programs it basically to follow that persona.
Now, of course, if you say, act as a neurotic negotiator, and you do that 10 times, it will come out 10 different ways, right?
Yeah, well, and also, so in general, anything that you see here is going to, every time you interact with it with the same prompt, you're going to get a different output. So they're designed to have randomness injected into it. So, and that's part of the power, but it can also be part of the challenge, and why you want to, sometimes why you have to do a lot of work to get the output in a format you want, is because like it'll work once, but then you try to build a process around it, and each time it's slightly different. So if you're trying to interface that with like a computer system that always expects it in a certain format, it becomes more challenging. Great question. Another fascinating sort of result from prompt engineering is that it's called chain of thought. So, the chain of thought pattern is basically you tell it to explain its reasoning that step by step, or explain your chain of thought, and then provide its answer. And basically, there's a lot of research that demonstrates if you have it explain its chain of thought step by step, it improves its reasoning. I think this is actually baked in on some level to ChatGPT now. We can't know for certain, but it looks like it's baked in versus the answers it used to give. So I had to do a bunch of work of trying to force it to not give its chain of thought first. But so I went into ChatGPT and I did some prompt engineering. I'm not going to fully explain what I'm doing here, but the short of it is I'm trying to get it to answer a question, and I'm trying to give it, in this first example, to give its answer before it explains its chain of thought. So I say, I'm in a spaceship without gravity. I have a cup with a needle in it. I move my foot on the bed, knocking over the cup onto the floor. I lift a book up and put it on a desk. Is there anything on the floor? And this is, I got this off the internet somewhere and adapted it a little bit. And then I force it to give me its answer first. And it says, yes. When the cup with the needle is knocked over onto the floor, both the cup and the needle will end up on the floor. In the absence of gravity, objects will not fall downward as they do on Earth, but they will still move in response to forces applied to them. In this case, the force applied by your foot knocking over the cup will cause the cup and the needle to move and come to rest on the floor, which I don't think is actually the correct or best answer. And so then I go back and I ask it again, and this time I force it to explain its reasoning first and then give its answer. And now it says, in a spaceship without gravity, objects do not behave as they do on Earth without gravity. When the cup with the needle in it is knocked over, the cup and the needle will not fall to the floor as they would on Earth. Instead, they will float in place or move in the direction of the force applied to them. Similarly, when the book is lifted and placed on the desk, it will not stay on the desk as it would on Earth. It will float away from the desk unless secured in place. Therefore, in the absence of gravity, there is no concept of objects being on the floor as we understand it on Earth. So the answer is no. So it switches its answer, and it's really, I think the reasoning is much better in the second one. So now I'm going to give you an example of, once you start knowing these patterns, of how you can combine them. So this is one we call the semantic filter. And basically the idea behind this is we're going to ask it to filter some set of text to remove something. We're not going to tell it exactly like step by step how to do it. We're just going to tell it what we want removed, and we're going to have it ask and explain to us what it's going to remove and why. So basically chain of thought, and then it's going to provide the filtered information. So we're putting together sort of this filtering idea with chain of thought to create a new pattern. And so here's what's happened. I've got a medical record, a fake medical record for a patient. And I'm going to say, filter the information below to remove any information that would help someone figure out that the patient has diabetes. First, explain what information you're going to remove and how it might help someone figure out that the patient has diabetes. Then provide the filtered information. And I provide the medical record, and it says, the chief complaint of increased thirst and fatigue should be removed because increased thirst is a common symptom of diabetes. The history of present illness mentions increased thirst and not checked her blood glucose levels, both of which should be removed because they are related to diabetes. Past medical history includes type 2 diabetes, mellitus, and I apologize, I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, and medication metformin 1,000 milligrams twice daily. So you notice I didn't tell it to do any of that. I just said, explain what you're going to remove and why, and I don't want to be able to figure out that this patient has diabetes. and then it goes and tells you what it's going to take out, and it's figuring out things that obviously, it was trained on predicting the next word in the sentence, but it's doing some really effective reasoning here in terms of what should be removed and why, including things like increased thirst and fatigue. So one of the things that sort of gets me excited about prompt engineering and these models is that it really changes who can program. Because if you think about what I'm doing, I'm really writing programs in natural language when I'm going and interacting with this tool, particularly when I'm having a conversation. I'm having a whole computation done through a conversation. And this is particularly true when you look at tools like Code Interpreter. But I'm going to give you the sense of why I think this is true. So I'm going to write a program in natural language, and I'm going to run it completely within ChatGPT. So I'm going to say, whenever you generate output, turn it into a comma-separated value list, so a CSV file. So if you're not familiar with this, it's basically like a format for describing tabular data where you have a series of columns and a series of rows, and you separate the values for each column with commas. So you would have like name, comma, role, and then you would have like Jules White, comma, professor. And you would it's a textual format for describing data. So this is my program up here. Whenever you generate output, turn it in a comma separated value list. So now in the next interaction, I give it the input for the program. I say, my name is Jules White, and I am teaching a course on prompt engineering. And we see below, it's now applying my program. It's saying, great, here's a CSV with that information. Name, comma, course, Jules White, comma, prompt engineering. Now, I want you to notice something about this. I mean, it's pretty incredible. One is it's error tolerant, right? I didn't give it a full specification of the program. If you go back, I didn't give it the columns, right? It doesn't know what the columns are supposed to be. So it's just coming up with columns that will work based on my input. It's trying to come up with a program that works and execute it. And it's doing that. And so it's chosen the columns name and course, and it's correctly extracted and mapped my name into the CSV file in the correct column and prompt engineering into the correct space. So it's generated the columns and it's correctly extracted the information and mapped it into CSV. So I'm going to go back and say, okay, well, those aren't the columns I want. So I'm going to modify my program. And so in the next interaction, I just say, from now on, the columns of the comma separated value list should be name, course, and role. And it says, okay, I understand that. And then notice I'm giving it the exact same input I gave it before. My name is Jules White, and I'm teaching a course on prompt engineering. And now I've got a program running that's extracting my columns and turning the prompt into CSV. Name, course, role, Jules White, prompt engineering teacher. And so I wrote a program completely in natural language, and I'm executing it and testing it on different inputs. Well, actually, I'm using the same input over and over. I'm just giving it the same input and testing it. Now I'm just going to go in and I'm going to modify my program, and I'm going to make it more sophisticated. I'm going to do something that would be really easy to do in ChatGPT, extraordinarily difficult to do with any normal programming language. And I'm going to say, in addition to whatever I type in, generate additional examples that fit the format of the CSV that I've asked you to produce. And then I go in and I give it exactly the same input to the program again. My name is Jules White, and I'm teaching a course on prompt engineering. And now I've got name, course, and role. I've got my columns that I programmed in. I've got Jules White, prompt engineering teacher, just like before. And now it's generated additional examples, fake data, to go with my format. 100% just off of me telling it in natural language and sort of iterating on my program. And if you wanted to go and generate, arbitrary data to fit whatever sort of format you've got here, like name, course, and role, you'd have a hard time doing it. And you're certainly not going to do it as concisely as I just did right there in those series of natural language interactions. So it's really transformational in terms of people can go and essentially program and build up computations through conversation. So one of the things that people always talk about, and I probably broke, this doesn't work as much now since I showed you those examples where I was uploading PDFs, but people always say to me, yeah, but it was trained and cut off in 2021, so it doesn't know anything about my data, my world, my documents. And call this the new facts pattern. It's basically like anything you want it to reason about that it wasn't trained on, you just provide it in the prompt at the start as a series of text or facts or whatever. and then you put whatever instructions or questions after it. So you can simply include it in the prompt itself. So I'm going to give you an example of this. First, I'm going to write a program, and then I'm going to give it some data that it definitely was not trained on. And hopefully this is an example that will resonate with people of why the tooling is going to be so transformational. So I say, act as my personal assistant. Whenever I give you a long email thread, you will create a bulleted list of questions and action items for me. The bullets should be numbered. If I type in a number of a bullet, you will summarize the conversation from the email chain around that bullet in one paragraph. If I type in a bullet and a number, you will draft a reply for me to read with that many paragraphs. So note, I'm basically telling it a full program. I'm saying, I'm going to, it's Monday morning. I ignored my email over the weekend. Some gargantuan email chain is sitting in my inbox, and I would like to dissect it. And I simply go in and cut and paste a long email in, and you're going to tell me what action items I need or questions for me are in that thing. Just boil it down, and you're going to number all of the action items and the questions. And then if I want to follow up on anything in that list, I can either just type the number of the question or the action item, and you'll tell me and summarize the conversation around it. Or if I type the number of an action item plus a number of paragraphs, you'll just draft a reply for me. So I'm just programming my email assistant to transform my email. So this is me then cutting and pasting this massive scheduling email that is a real scheduling email where we were trying to schedule our generative AI course. And here it is dissecting it with my program. What are the suggested title and transcript for the course? What should be included in the catalog? Are the settings of the course entry and yes, correct? When can we submit it? All this stuff. And then 1.7, have the room and schedule been finalized? And then it extracts out Tuesday, Thursday, 9:30 and ESB 048. And so I'm going to follow up. Now I've written an entire program and I've given a menu system, and I'm typing in the identifier 1.7 of this bullet. So it's supposed to summarize that bullet in one paragraph, the discussion around it. And it says, in the email thread, the team discusses the room and schedule of the course. Shiro suggests the Tuesday, Thursday, 9:30 a.m. time slot, but the only available room at the time is Engineering and Science Building room 048 with a capacity of 60. Jules approves of this room choice, mentioning that it is a good size for the first run of the class. The conversation does not provide any further details on the room and schedule, so it seems that the team has agreed on Tuesday, Thursday, 9:30. I mean, that last part's kind of phenomenal. It's saying, hey, look, no, there was no like definitive, yeah, let's use that classroom. There was just a conversation that got to a certain point, and two of the people in the conversation had agreed to it. So it sounds like everybody's agreed, even though nobody else has said anything about it. So that looks like what the decision was made. And so that's running my personal email assistant, on an email that I cut and paste in. And all I did was apply that pattern. I just cut and paste the email in and then put, basically my program to run on top of it. Now you could also put it above and put the program under it. I just did it in two separate interactions. It's also really transformational in terms of like generating content that has particular patterns or structures. And one way to try to do this is to use what we call the template pattern. And you just tell it, I'm going to provide a template for your output, XYZ in all caps as my placeholder. Try to fit the output into one of my placeholders that I list. And here's the template, pattern and placeholders. And so this is a great one, for example, if you want to take structured text and extract stuff from it. So here's an example. I say I'm going to provide a template, X is my placeholder. And I have beneath it a template where I've got a fictitious URL for FrenchRevolution.com. And I have in it participant/role properly escaped. So I want to go and extract and create URLs related to the French Revolution and participants in it. So then I just take a paragraph of the Wikipedia entry for the French Revolution. I copy and paste it in as the next input to my program. And now it transforms it into a series of URLs that follow the format. So we've got like, Napoleon Bonaparte is the participant and military victories is the role. And I thought, well, God, like, didn't he have a bigger role to discuss? But if you actually go back and look at the paragraph itself, that's pretty much all that it says about Napoleon in that paragraph. There's very little. So it's a reasonable, accurate synopsis based on the template I gave it and the input that I gave. one of the other sort of fascinating things that you can do with this is that it can learn by examples that you give it in the prompt. So here's an example where I go and I give it a bunch of objects and I give it speeds for these objects. I say, okay, a plane, its speed is fast, a worm, it's slow, a car, it's fast, a human is slow. And you notice I'm not like giving it quantitative rules for assessing this. I'm just giving it a bunch of examples where I'm sort of classifying things and bucketing them or categorizing them. And then I get to the bottom and I say object, ball kicked by a baby, and speed, colon, and I stop. And then its response is slow because it's basically learning the pattern that I've given it and then coming up with what should follow in the pattern. So based on the fact that I said speed was the last thing, it knows that slow, or basically the categorization or classification, depending on what terms you want to use, is what needs to come next. And then it's taking the thing that I did and using that classification. And notice I didn't describe the rules. I didn't describe how to do this. I just gave it examples and it's learning how to do it. Here's another example with conversation. So I say, I'm faking a conversation between me and my wife where I say, Jules, colon, I'm tired of AI trying to replace me. It can code better than me now. And Lisa, who's my wife, colon, at least you can spend more time biking. And then Jules, colon, so basically like, what am I going to say next? And then it generates the dialogue. It's picking up on the pattern. That's true, Lisa. And maybe now I can finally start that woodworking project, and then and then I go in and I just put in Lisa to like continue the pattern and prompt it to get the next piece of dialogue. And it says, oh, absolutely, Jules. And remember, AI may be advanced. So it's basically learning the patterns, learning that I'm trying to have a conversation between Lisa and Jules, the context of the conversation, and now it's just continuing the dialogue based on what I've got. Or we can go in and do things like, I've got a system, which is bacteria multiplying in an ideal environment. I don't know if this is accurate. I'm not particularly well-versed in this. I tried Googling it, and I think it's a reasonably accurate approximation. I say growth exponential. I say system human population, and then growth. And it's trying to pick up with very limited knowledge and explanation what I'm trying to do. And it says logistic, and then provides a description of why. Potentially exponential at times, but cannot continue to do so indefinitely due to various constraints. So really sophisticated things. And you notice all of these are based on simple statements, but you have to know the patterns to go into these statements in order to easily tap into it. If you went and started just sort of trying to explain all this in detail, you're not going to get the same behavior. But if you know the persona pattern, for example, and you just say act as, you can essentially tap into all of this capability that's there. But if you know the pattern that needs to go into your language. And a great example of this is gameplay. So you just go and say, we're going to play a game together, and you describe the constraints on the game. And then depending on how you want the game to work, one of the kind of things you can do is say, ask me for my first move. So here's one where I'm going to say, we're going to play a game together. You will use the following historical description to create a turn-by-turn game. I will need to make decisions of what to do based on my knowledge of related historical events. And then I cut and paste a part of the Wikipedia entry from the French Revolution into the prompt. And then I just say, ask me what I would like to do in my turn. And it comes back and it says, welcome to the historical game set during the French Revolution. Please choose one of the following actions: join the Royalists, support the Directory, join the Jacobins, assist Napoleon Bonaparte, incite popular unrest, stay neutral. And if you do this, you can start interacting and it'll start playing the game with you. And if you at any point are like, well, the game's not that interesting, or I want you to add these rules or constraints, you just simply go back and tweak it, and it'll start tweaking all of the rules of the game. Now, one of the other interesting things about the LLMs is they're really good at dissecting human language and dissecting what we enter into it. But the things that they output are also just text, and they don't necessarily know where they came from. So they're actually surprisingly good at doing sort of self-assessment. So if you wanted to have one check the other or one train the other, these types of things, they can do it. So here's an example. You're imagining you're a company and you're releasing a new product, and you want to see, is the language in my branding message on brand with my company? So I say, my company is releasing a new drug. Our brand values are clarity, simplicity, and comfort. Explain what you will look for in messages that effectively communicate our brand value. Then score these two possible marketing messages based on your rubric. And so I give it two different examples of branding messages. I actually used ChatGPT to generate both of these in separate conversations. One, I tried to coax it into being more complex, and one of them I coaxed it into being simpler. And this is a completely separate conversation where I'm now asking it to score and look at the two of them. And version B, just the simple, like concise version of this is version B is sort of like a more clear, simple feeling message. And it comes back and it says, you know, version B better communicates your brand values of clarity, simplicity, and comfort. And it had a whole longer explanation of this, but it was too long to fit into one slide. So I just put it down, and it conveys the message in a more customer-centric way. So you can do that with brand messages. You can also do it with source code. It turns out that it can understand the difference between modular code and code that's not modular. You can give it a set of design principles and show it source code and say which of these better adheres to the design principles, and it does a really good job. Yeah, Ray?
Could you give it instructions where you say, I want you to have a persona that is someone living in operating under French culture versus somebody operating under American culture, and would the response be different?
Yes, yes. And it's true. You'll get a different response, and you'll also get it paying attention to different aspects. So like if the best example of this I can give is like when we're looking at source code for software, if we tell it to act as a senior security engineer versus a senior software engineer, it'll clue in on different things and rank differently. So if they have like if you have two code samples and one's much more secure than the other one, but it's also slower than the other one, it may tell you that the one that's faster, the software engineer may like it better versus the security engineer might like the other one better and rank it higher.
So like in terms of my idea of French versus American, I could have a different example, but is the default then for it to be acting as if it knows that I'm an American because of my IP address? Or like, what if the same person was in France doing the exact same thing? And like, if you were to tell it explicitly that French versus American attitudes, consider those, and if those would be different, would the model know that the person in Paris is in fact interested in a French perspective?
So I don't know if it gets your locale as input. I don't think it does. And so I think it would only have your text. By default, I think it would only have the text that you entered in the prompt to try to decide, you know, your sort of persona or state of mind or values. So my suspicion is like the only way it would know is if you like went and interacted with it and you put your prompt in French, and it sounds like uses terms and things that are like Parisian or something, then it might be like, okay, you sound, you know, it might infer that you're from Paris. And if you put it in an English, you know, I would think it would have to be based on the prompt itself, but I don't know. It's a really interesting question. I haven't actually heard anybody talk about that. And I bet that they are not putting it in, but it is a really interesting idea. I do know of a company that they implemented dynamic translation of their website into basically any language. And the way it works is when they get a request to do something with the website, they basically look at the locale or where the person is in the world and the language settings that come from the browser in the request. And then they check if they've already translated the website into that locale. And if they have not, they send off whatever page or content. It's even like dynamically generated stuff in the shopping cart. They send it off to ChatGPT, dynamically translate it into that language and return the response. But then they also put it into a queue and say, we need one of our translators to follow up on this translation. And then they go and look at it, read through it, make sure it's accurate. And they basically do it dynamically onto whatever language and combination of it. I don't know if they're tweaking it for other things like values or things as well, but yeah, I could see you doing that, you know, where you dynamically change all your messaging and branding and everything based on where the person is in the world and language and other things, or even maybe
Trying to figure
past.
out if there's a default, in essence, a default persona of, like, in this assessment, there's a context that it presumes.
Oh, yeah.
So
So there is definitely some default that we can't see. So all of their guardrails that they put on and sort of the steering of it, there is some prompt engineering that's happening that we can't see. So there definitely is some default persona, and it's probably something along the lines of, act as a helpful assistant and, refuse to answer any questions, about facts, or if any questions about facts after 2021 are asked, like, let them know that you're an AI assistant, you don't have that. Like, there's some type of prompt like that that's behind the scenes that we can't see, that is the default persona. So, which is part of the reason why people use personas a lot of time to try to break out of the rails of these things, is they try to kind of have it switch personas in order to get out of that default persona and those default rails. Yeah. Okay. So one thing that's really interesting is, so my father was a professor in creative writing, and he was always talking about clarity in writing, being really specific, all of these things, and it turns out this stuff really matters a lot in prompts. And kind of the way intuitively and sort of quantitatively we look at this is, we look at it a lot in terms of code. Like, if you ask it to generate code, and you see this all the time when people are talking, oh, I got it to generate some source code and it has all these security vulnerabilities in it, or it's really slow, or it's a bad example. And you go and you look at how they asked it, and they just said, like, create code to do this, but they weren't specific. They didn't say they wanted it to be fast. They didn't say if they wanted it to be modular. They didn't say they wanted it to be secure. They didn't give it additional details on what they wanted. And so it just picked something. And it turns out, if you go and you're more specific about what you want, you're more likely to get what you want out. So if you go and you say, just give me Python code to do something, may or may not be fast. If you say, give me Python to do something as fast as the size of the list grows, you're more likely to get some code out that's going to be fast as the size of the list gets bigger, if it's processing a list. And it's, essentially the way that I think of it intuitively is like, you're giving it a target that it's trying to hit. And if you don't give it a lot of details, you're giving it a very big target. And you're saying anything in this range is fine with me. If you narrow your constraints down, you're giving it a smaller target to hit. And so you're going to get something that's more likely to satisfy your requirements. And so a lot of times when people are saying, oh, it generated this bad output, a lot of times it's that there's just not enough detail in the request. And the default is not to try to read your mind. The default is to give you a solution that, meets your needs, and the needs are expressed through the prompt. So this is an example of a paper that we just wrapped up that I think gets into one of the other things that is really going to be transformational in these tools. And that is that the generational ability, the fact that they can go and generate lots of content, either it be marketing messages or source code or these types of things, when you combine that with like either quantitative analysis or self-assessment, you can get like this really like sort of transformational capability, which is go and generate 100 different coding solutions, automatically run them and see how fast each one is, and then just give me back the highest performance one. Or go and generate 100 marketing messages, automatically beat each one up or score them based on some marketing and branding rubric using self-assessment, and then tell me which one, or sort them and rank them based on this branding rubric. And so those types of use cases, once you're going to start getting built into the tools, are going to be really transformational. We did a sort of initial preliminary study of this in source code, where we went and took Stack Overflow, which is like a forum where software developers go and post questions, and other developers post solutions, to coding, like basically code solutions to their problems. And we took a series of coding problems that people had posted on Stack Overflow. We took the highest voted solutions that everybody said was best on that solution, and we compared to what happens if we took a series of prompts and we had each prompt generate 100 different solutions, and then we automatically benchmarked them and selected the best or fastest one that we got and compared it. And basically what you get is the prompting based approach gives you a much higher probability that you're going to get the fastest possible solution for each of the ones. And when I say fastest possible, I mean we had over 700 solutions for every single problem. And so we compared to the best of those 700, the fastest of those 700. And the human produced the fastest only once. And the ones that went and iterated and produced many different ones, and then we selected the best from those, were much, much more effective. And so this is like, I think it's not replacing the human, but it's allowing the software developer to go in and see the results of an experiment where this is what we want to accomplish, go and come up with different ways of doing that and score them and rank them for me and help me inform my decision of which code I'm actually going to select, or which branding message, or which strategy I'm going to use to try out this thing. So just to wrap up here, I want to leave time. I think we've got about half an hour for questions. If you want to learn prompt engineering, actually this slide's out of date. There's 80,000 students in this class today. There's a Coursera class on prompt engineering that I created that's available, and it goes into all of this in a lot more depth. And it's designed for anybody from any discipline. It's also, if you go through the Future of Learning website underneath the Data Science Institute, you can join the course through Vanderbilt and you can get the certificate for free if you care about that. You can also just go take the course without the certificate and it's free. But normally you have to pay for the certificate, and that's available. If you're interested in some of these patterns and more things, we have a paper on this. That's if you go search for prompt engineering on Google Scholar, you should find it as the #1 or #2 result. And it goes through a lot of these patterns in more detail. And then also has a bunch of more that aren't in this presentation, but it's also sort of a starting point. And then additional resource is there's a whole bunch of workshops that are going to be coming out. This is the first of many. This workshop's going to be repeated several times. There's going to be a follow-on one where myself and some folks from the Data Science Institute, probably Shiro Bell or Jesse Spencer-Smith or Doug Schmidt, are thinking about how to use it in the classroom, what the impact is, how to account for it. Those websites or those workshops are all listed here on the Data Science Institute. And then these are some additional patterns. There's also a paper that's more software specific for those people that are dealing with software and want to know how to generate higher quality code with it. That's listed down here. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. And I would be happy to answer any questions. This should be, it was intended for all faculty and staff. So it should be just us. And I'm going to go ahead and if you have a question you prefer not recorded, just let me know and I'll pause the recording. Otherwise, I'll record all the questions as well. And also let me check chat too. Okay, so there's a question about the program responds to a series of interactions on a topic. If you log off and come back, does it retain what you did before? So if you have maybe 40 steps of back and forth, do you have to re-enter all of these again? So if you go into ChatGPT and it's within the same conversation and you enter a new message, it'll pick up where it left off. If you start a new conversation, then you'll have to re-enter everything from scratch. So the moment you leave that conversational thread, basically the state is gone. So you'd have to start over. With Code Interpreter, that tool that I was showing at the beginning where it can read documents and everything, it's a little more restrictive even than that. And that is when you start a conversation, if you pause the conversation, meaning you go off and do something else and you come back like 30 minutes later, it'll time out. And that Code Interpreter tool basically uses some of their computing resources in the cloud to store your files and like all of the graphics and things that it's generating as you're like having to do data visualization. So if it times out, it'll lose all your files and you won't be able to continue the conversation without starting over. So just ChatGPT, as long as you pick up at the bottom of the conversation, you can come back anytime and pick up at the bottom of the conversation and be fine. If you start a new conversation, you'll have to start over. Now there's some new features where you can give it a prompt that will always go into every conversation in your settings. And then if you go to Code Interpreter, you really have to get everything done while you're sitting there, because if you walk off, all your files and everything go away and you have to start over. Let's see. Another question is, given that randomness is baked in, does it make sense to replicate our work several times to see how much generated content can vary? That's a great technique. So like, if you are like, I wouldn't use it. I would like, if you know that like you want to always account for this in your use case, right? So like, it shouldn't be if you do some type of like analysis of something, you probably want to do it more than once, and then you want to carefully check it. Like if you're generating any type of branding, marketing, email thing, it's always worthwhile to just have it generate like 10 of them and look at them. And it's really great for like brainstorming. So like one of the use cases in education is like teachers using it to help brainstorm lesson plans on a particular topic. Like take this topic and give me 10 new ideas or ways that I could teach it or approach it, or 10 different examples for explaining it, or 10 different examples from completely different perspectives for different audiences. So you can do the audit, you can do the persona as the person that you're asking the questions to, or you can say, explain it to this persona, and it can do it. So that's another one that's really useful. So another question, how might one construct a prompt to get ChatGPT to find a bug in an existing Python script for physics simulation? So probably I mean, I think it depends on the complexity of the code and whether or not it'll fit into one ChatGPT prompt. So it's good at software engineering if the problem can be solved. So if you're talking about just ChatGPT, if you can fit all the code into one prompt and your question, because there's a limit on how many characters you can cut and paste in there, and then you could probably say, here's the description of what my bug, what the output or what it's doing. Can you explain what in this code might be causing that behavior? And it's pretty good at spotting vulnerabilities or spotting bugs or other things like that. I didn't show it, but in Code Interpreter, you can upload a zip file of an entire source code repository with all of your code in it. And it's depending on the complexity of the repository and the feature, you can actually say, go implement this feature or go look for this type of bug. And I've had past students who are developers tell me that they went in and had it find race conditions in concurrent code, and then a source code base that they just uploaded as a zip file. So I suspect it's possible, but I mean, the key is getting it into the prompt and asking the question of like, in as much context and detail about what the output is that you're seeing and what's wrong with it in the code. And it's pretty effective at reasoning these things. Question is, subscribing to ChatGPT Plus worth it for a casual user? And to me, ChatGPT Plus is like, somebody walks along on the street and they're like, if you hand me $20, I will hand you $100,000. And like, I'll give you this suitcase full of cash. Like, it's like the most valuable investment of all the subscriptions that I pay for, I would cut off. Like, if I didn't require internet in my house for ChatGPT to get access to it, I would pay for ChatGPT over internet in my house probably at this point. Like, it's so valuable on a day-to-day basis from like any random task. Like, I'm writing a paper and I'm trying to figure out some weird LaTeX formatting error in my, when in the PDF that it's generating, and I go and cut and paste the LaTeX in there and I'm like, rewrite this LaTeX so that it's formatted this way. And LaTeX, like, typesetting, like language, and it does it. Or I go in and, I'm like, here's all of this, text. I need to know these things from the text, and I need it turned into a CSV file that I can put into Excel, and it just, does it remarkably well. So like, there's just so many use cases for it that from my perspective, like ChatGPT Plus is super valuable. And the new tool that they have available that's only available for ChatGPT Plus, which is Code Interpreter, is like it's transformational in what it can do. I mean, even you can just zip up a bunch of files like I showed in that example, give it to it, say, read all the files, reorganize them for me, or you want to read CFPs for like NSF or some other like call for proposal, just upload the PDF and like list everything I need to submit and my page limits to submit this thing. Okay, item 3, tell me more about that item because I've never seen that item before. That seems to be something new. Tell me more about what that is and what I need to know about it. And it can summarize it and do an effective job. what is the approximate limit on size of information given in prompts? Can you give it 300 recent journal articles on a big topic and ask it what are the biggest new ideas coming out of these? Unfortunately, not yet. So it's it depends on which version you're using. And so with GPT-4 is the biggest that you can get through OpenAI. And I think right now you're limited to 16,000 tokens, which I think they translate that as roughly 10,000 words, I think is the way that they describe that. Because a token is it's not a one-to-one match with a word. So I think it's roughly like 10,000 words, I think is what the biggest you can do in GPT-4. Sort of intuitively, I think of it as like, once you go beyond like 3 or 4 pages, you can't do it in one prompt. If you go to Code Interpreter, you don't have to do everything in one prompt anymore, because you can basically tell it, take these PDFs in this zip file, and you can build sort of a process to go and read and analyze them incrementally. Now, it would take a long time, is the only kind of downside to this, because it would be a lot of back and forth prompting. But if you took like 10 papers or 30 papers and you said, go read and summarize each one of them, and you sat around and babysat it while I did it, because you'd have to keep the session open, it could do it. It could go read and summarize and generate summaries of them. As an example, when I'm filming all these videos for my current Coursera course, I extract the transcript of my video, and I go in and I basically have it turn the transcripts into other products that I need to go with it. So I'm like, extract basically all of these types of things that I talk about and turn them into an outline. And that outline I'm going to be able to go back and then use in class. Say, here's an outline of what's going to be covered in this video. I can go in and I can say, take this transcript and generate a quiz for it that I can put up on Coursera based on the topics in it, and it can generate it. And so like it can read one product, one thing, and then generate a bunch of products that come out. When will the new paper you mentioned about cheap generation of solutions going to be available? We have the camera ready is due on the 10th, I think, or maybe it's the 30th. I have to go look. I think it's the 10th. So I suspect it'll be right after that. Hopefully they'll give us a link. We emailed the program chair to see if it's okay to concurrently post it on archive. And if we do that, I can send it out before then. Curious about how the template pattern works in Copilot. Have you had any personal experience or nuggets of wisdoms you mind sharing? So Copilot, I have mixed emotions on Copilot, because I find it it's super useful in that it's integrated into if we're talking about Copilot for like in the development environment for writing code. I feel like it's a more limited version of what you can get out of ChatGPT, but it doesn't require cutting and pasting. So I can typically get more sophisticated code out of ChatGPT, but I think part of that is just because I end up writing a lot more describing what I want. Whereas when I'm in Copilot, you have to write it as a comment, kind of describing what you want in a comment, and then, starting a method or something to have it complete it. And I don't tend to be as descriptive when I'm working in Copilot, just because of the interface to it. And it's less like encouraging from my perspective to generate a bunch of text. And also, I don't know what exact model they're using underneath the hood of it right now, but my sense is it's not as good as some of the other ones. Let's see. In the beginning, you mentioned that ChatGPT was not developed to be factual. Does this mean people or organizations who need facts will have to develop their own knowledge repositories? How can this be scaled? So in order to use it in a factual way, you have to be really intentional in the prompt engineering piece of it right now, because you basically have to give it actual facts that you trust, and give them in some identified way, and then ask it to cite back to them. So you can ask it to generate an output that cites back to facts that you gave it in a prompt. I mean, there's probably lots of different ways to do it, but this is the way that I think is probably most common and reliable. And so you give it the facts that you want it to base its, analysis on, you have it cite back to identifiers in your own fact, and then you still have a human go and look at and see if it's self-consistent. Basically, did it generate an output that has citations back to the set of facts that you told it could use? And can you identify all those facts as being there and being correct? You can also do a secondary prompt. You can go send it off to another LLM and basically say, is this self-consistent? And you give it the original facts, the numbering, and the output with the citations, and it can try to check it as maybe like a first stage to help. You still kind of need a human there, but you can kind of come up with ways. You can also do things like have it generate some output where you didn't give it facts, you just asked it a question, and you say, like, list all the facts that your analysis or output depends on so that I can fact check them. And it can do a pretty effective job of pulling out all of like a list of facts and queuing the human in. I need to read all of these things. I need to read the output and decide if I think everything in the list of facts aligns with the actual facts that are listed in the output. And then they can go and fact check those other things. And some of the tools like Bing and that, basically what they're doing is they're doing a web search, collecting the results of the web search, putting it into a prompt, and then having the prompt try to answer your question based on the results of the web search. So there's ways to do it, but it's still kind of, it's still a bit of a moving target at this point in terms of how to do it really well. But I think it's a very solvable problem. If you're dealing with your own knowledge, you have to figure out, pulling it in and referencing it. And most of the approaches to do this are like to scale it up are based on having like a vector database where you go and you have the prompt with the question and you try to find, using sort of more traditional techniques, related snippets of text or related articles that then get combined in the prompt, sent to the LLM to produce the output. And it may do this over and over again until it processes through all of the hits until you get to some point. One task we ask students to do is to generate an abstract for research articles. It seems easy for them to use GPT for that assignment. Super easy. Like, I mean, ridiculous. Like the email that I sent out for this thing, it could be, you could give it a PDF and you can say, generate an abstract for this. Or in my case, for the email I sent out for this thing, I just literally uploaded my slides to Code Interpreter and I said, write the email that I'm going to send out. And I didn't tell it who I was. And it read all of my slides, summarized the main points in my slides, and then drafted the 2-paragraph email, and it figured out who I was because my name was on the title slide. So 100% an abstract based on a PDF would be a very easy assignment for a student to do with this. I'm going to be teaching this fall. Is it possible that some students will ask ChatGPT to write the paper assignments for them? What is the most efficient tool for us to check? So it's not realistic to detect it. And so one of the interesting things that just happened was OpenAI at the very beginning. OpenAI is the company that created ChatGPT. They created the state-of-the-art detector for this. And the accuracy, I think, was on the order of 27% true positives and 9% false no, it was more than that. Now I'm forgetting the numbers. Numbers are relevant. It was very low accuracy, extremely low accuracy, so low that OpenAI has now removed that tool and just say, hey, it's not really feasible. It's not realistically detectable. And part of the reason it's not really easily detectable is, one, if you start having different personas, you can really wildly change the output with some prompt engineering. You can also go, and if you just hand edit the output a little bit, it becomes very difficult to detect with the detectors. And then the other reason that there's been a move away from that is that there's a lot of false positives with those detectors. There's not a lot of transparency, and there's a lot of research that shows basically they flag people who are not native speakers. They get flagged as being AI generated text at a much higher rate, like significantly higher rates in the research, depending on which paper you look at. And so OpenAI actually pulled their own tool off to just say, hey, this isn't a reasonably feasible problem right now to solve. And if you do use those detectors, like a lot of the ones that are commercial tools, they provide no transparency on their training sets. Most of them claim higher accuracy than OpenAI, which created ChatGPT, the tool. And they provide no transparency on their algorithms. If you compare that, OpenAI told their how the things worked. I mean, I think I don't know if they provided full details on everything, but they provided a lot more transparency than a lot of these others. So essentially, if you reverse engineered what the best of these companies' claims, and you reverse engineered that against all the Vanderbilt assignments, we would have thousands of students, incorrectly flagged for using AI per year based on assignments that are submitted to Vanderbilt. So the short answer is it's not realistically detectable. You have to think of either, one upfront clear communication with students on what is and is not allowed, and then two, rethinking how assignments are structured, like either making sure they make use of more recent information. I've heard faculty say, we're going to set the bar higher. We'll go generate the essay with ChatGPT. We'll say this is the minimum bar. That's a 0. And so you have to be above that. You have to be able to improve on what's there. I've heard all kinds of different approaches, and I think it really depends on the discipline, but detecting it is not a realistic approach to, going into the fall, because it's not going to work. So there's a question about any concerns about sharing confidential identifiable information that is on files. And so I think there's kind of two perspectives. So one, from a legal perspective, there absolutely is an issue. So if you cut and paste into the public ChatGPT or public Anthropic or any of the other ones that are out there, if you look at their privacy policies, they're actually pretty good. They basically say they're not going to train on your data. They're not going to expose it, these other types of things. But, if you're like the medical center, there's no business associates agreement in place with OpenAI. On the other hand, Microsoft, for example, resells essentially ChatGPT through their Azure cloud computing platform. And so the medical center has a program, and I believe Paul Harris is one of the people that's leading it, where there's going to be a version of this thing that's available and rolled out. I don't know how they'll manage it. That would be a question for over there, to basically, if information goes in there, it's audited, it's logged, it has all the compliance things. It goes into a special, separate, secure enclave within Azure that's just Vanderbilt Medical Center. Vanderbilt's going to have something similar. It's not ready yet. The UIT is planning to have it available, hopefully soon. And it will be for, if we're going to go put certain types of data into it, that's where it will go. Now, I still think there's a lot of people are still worried about like what should go in there or what should not. But if you think about it realistically, when we started with the cloud, basically everybody's like, I'm never putting my data in there. No company is going to give their data to Amazon to sit in their cloud. And now everybody does it, right? And they all sign the legal agreements that they need to feel confident that their data that's stored in the cloud with Amazon or Microsoft or Google is secure and private and protected and follows legal compliant requirements. And so I think that's where this is basically going, is all of the cloud providers are going to offer these things as a service. Companies, enterprises like Vanderbilt are going to sign up for and get the legal agreements in place, and then set up sort of the secure private versions of these things, and it'll go in there. Now, right now, today, I would not cut and paste anything sensitive into ChatGPT code interpreter. It should just be stuff that, like, I'll put my personal data in there and I don't worry about that. But I wouldn't take something from Vanderbilt that I was worried about and cut it and paste it in there. And so, taking a blank 1040 from the IRS, I'll cut and paste that in there. I'm not going to take my 1040 with my social security number and paste it in there. Taking some source code that I'm working on for a research project, I'll cut and paste it in there and not have any concerns about it whatsoever. But I wouldn't take some confidential, document, grades, things like that shouldn't go in there. Great questions. Oh, Robbie?
Hi, Jules. Thanks for this. This has been great. I'm enrolled in the Coursera class, so if you talk about this in the later classes, I apologize for not getting there yet, but I am one of the business librarians over at Owen. Our first students arrive here on August 7th, so I anticipate that this is going to be a topic that we deal with. And I was playing around earlier this week between ChatGPT 3.5 and the baked in Bing and Bard, AI. And obviously in business, we need to have information that is uber current. And so I anticipate that our students will not be taking the time to cut and paste analyst reports into ChatGPT-3. I anticipate they're going to be using Bing or Bard. So I'm wondering if you could just talk briefly about the differences underneath, if you find that one is, easier or better for, kind of the quick and easy things we anticipate students would be using it for in the fall.
Yeah, great question. So I think that if for 99% of my tasks, well, I take that back. So the two that I would be using would be either ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude. So Claude has this key capability, which is it can take much more information at once. ChatGPT Code Interpreter is now their killer app where you can go and upload documents and things and do analyses. And I think for searching for information, I would still start with a web search. Or I would use one of these tools to help me kind of understand what is the space, and then I would go and follow up on things. So I think it's best not to use it as a source of truth and knowledge, but more as a kind of figuring out the landscape and where to go look. And that's the way I would personally use it. So I would go and figure out what are the topic areas, what are the types of things I should be looking for, and then go use a traditional search tool or the library or something else to follow up on it. That would be my personal take on how to do this. And now whether or not students will do that, I don't know. But Bing has obviously the search engine integration and Bard. So my experience is that Bing is probably pretty close to ChatGPT in terms of capability, since they're based on the same underlying model. Now they do different things in terms of some of the prompt engineering and some of the data that's being pulled in. So there are differences, and sometimes it matters. At a high level, I tend to see ChatGPT and Anthropic's Claude sort of standalone as being more sophisticated in terms of reasoning and doing a lot of these things that I was showing in here. Bard, though, is, Google originated these ideas. And so my guess is that Bard will at least be on par in the places that it's not already very quickly. And so I think what's going to happen is they're all going to be extremely capable. And Claude, I think, has this key capability that you can just take huge amounts of text. So for the use case of just gigantic document analysis, Claude has a clear advantage there. ChatGPT has got the clear advantage of Code Interpreter right now. Bing and Bard, their key thing is the ability to pull in real, web searches into the discussion. So I think they're all kind of nuanced, but I'm not sure if that was helpful. So we have a couple more questions. Humata.ai. I don't know as much about Humata.ai, so I can't comment on them. But the ones I've looked at are Anthropic's Claude, GPT 3, 5, and 4, which is essentially ChatGPT, Bing, Bard, and then some of the open source models like Llama and Vicuna and some of these. And personally, I don't think that the open source models really can compete with the service ones that are out there, just because realistically, to get this really sophisticated reasoning, you need the bigger versions of those models, which require running on real infrastructure, complex infrastructure. So it's hard for them to match what you're seeing on these public services that are running on these massive compute infrastructures. And if you download one of those and try to run it, it's one, you don't typically get the same performance even on their larger models. At least in my experience, maybe not looking at the right use cases, and then there's the complexity of running it and managing it. It's difficult. Well, I think we're at time. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will send out a link to this recording afterwards and to all the people that participated. And I really appreciate all of the fantastic questions, and thank you so much. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions or anything that I can help with. Thank you.